Is it being recorded now? Hold on, recording.
Democracy work. And you are the ones who make that happen. So you've just had, I believe, a screen come up that says that the recording is in process. So please tap your little button that says it's okay, and we will continue to record. The league's position on education is basically to have a quality education for every child. And that is quite a goal, but it's a reachable goal, and we can make it, especially when you citizens and your friends get out there and vote in the elections. The voting is the first step. The being an informed voter is the second step. And then you're advocating with the elected officials to educate them about your perspective of what public education should be, is that third step. So I want to say a special thank you to all of you and a special welcome. Now I'd like to introduce our grand speaker tonight. Superintendent Stephanie Elizalde was elected by the Board of Trustees in June of 2022 to serve as the superintendent at the Dallas Independent School District. Dr. Elizalde is a third-generation public school teacher following in the footsteps of her grandmother and her father. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and a Master of Arts degree in educational leadership from the University of Texas, San Antonio, and holds a doctorate in educational leadership and policy from the University of Texas in Austin. A native Texan, Dr. Elizalde is a lifelong educator committed to equity and excellence in education for every student, consistent with our position. She has a proven track record of raising student academic achievement while building a culture of inclusion and equity, principles of a democracy. She understands the importance of developing collaborative relationships with the city and individual communities that are home to each individual school. In addition, she supports relationships with parents and teachers. Her career has included working in diverse school systems from small to large urban settings, including Southwest ISD and San Antonio ISD. She has served students in various roles, including a teacher, principal, assistant superintendent, and deputy chief. Please see the chat and also see the website, because her full bio is linked on each of those sites. And so I welcome you again, Dr. Elizalde, and I thank you for coming, and you are the show.
Thank you so much, Susie. That's so sweet. I appreciate that very much. And thank you, Ashley, for getting this started. Wow, what an introduction. I'm truly humbled to just be a part of this process and of being able to bring you some information. I've always admired the work Susie Bell, you and the League of Women Voters have always done in our district. And I really do want to begin with that sentiment of public education is how democracy is going, regardless of whatever party affiliation. It's the democratic process that public schools really center themselves around. And all you have to do is look at the state constitution that specifically calls out. The Texas Constitution said school education, free public schooling education for every single student was so important that the state allowed the creation of ISDs, independent school districts, for the purposes of creating the accessibility so that every single child, regardless of whether they were in an urban setting or a rural setting, whether it was a high property wealth or low property wealth, would have access to such quality education. So let me just start a few minutes. I would be remiss if I were the superintendent of Dallas ISD and I didn't talk about some highlights before I get into our legislative agenda. I just want to tell you about some great things that are going on with students. You all are well aware of the national attention our magnet schools get, and they're very high achieving. And we also have very high achieving neighborhood schools. Just two quick examples. We've got a senior who came to us from Cameroon. You may have seen her story recently. She's at Hillcrest and she's going to be going to Harvard. So from Hillcrest to Harvard. We have another senior who's at North Dallas High School and she's going to Stanford. So we have so many students. Those are just little nuggets. Our teachers, we're going to be celebrating our Teachers of the Year at our State of the District Gala next week on May 4th. And one of those teachers that we're going to be spotlighting is a former Dallas ISD Teacher of the Year, Josue Tamares, who chaired the Governor's Teacher Vacancy Task Force. And among many recommendations, two high priorities that teachers really recommended the governor to look at were, not surprising, increasing salaries for teachers, as well as added support and training. So with that, I think that's a good segue because we'll see whether the legislature actually pays attention to the very questions they were asking of folks. So let's start with one of my favorite teachers of all time, former public school teacher and one of our former governors, Ann Richards. You know, she had the saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Well, right now, I feel like we're the appetizer, the main course, and the dessert because we're not at the table. People are making decisions about education with no educators at the table. So let's talk about, we have much to talk about. So let me, and before I do, let me just remind you, and Susie Bell, you mentioned this at the very beginning, there is still time for our legislators to hear from you all. And that's part of this wonderful opportunity you're providing me to just give you some insight into what's happening in Austin and then ask you to come to action, call and email your legislators with your thoughts after I give you a few of our experiences. So let's start with school funding. In 2019, to be very fair to the Texas Legislature, they stepped up and they made a sincere commitment to funding public schools. That was House Bill 3. But since 2019, there has not been an increase to the basic allotment. What is that basic allotment? That's the main source of revenue for a school district. And currently Dallas ISD, our basic allotment is $6,160, $6,160 per student. Now keep that amount in mind because later on when I talk about education savings account, you're going to see a different amount. And maybe you have some of the same questions that I do. So we haven't increased the basic allotment and a lot has happened. I think you all would agree since 2019. All you have to do is look at your tax bill and you know that there's been a lot of increases in property values along with other costs. So let's talk about what the legislature has actually proposed in the budgets right now. What they're talking about right now doesn't even keep pace with inflation. And truthfully, it seems like it's a retreat from the 2019 commitment that they made. Now, you've probably already heard some lawmakers make this claim that, well, we're giving the most money to public schools than they've ever received. Well, that's factual. They're giving us more dollars. What isn't true is that it's not even keeping up with inflation. So while they're giving more dollars, it is not anywhere near the 14.6% increase that Texas alone has seen since 2021. So what does that mean? And that's for every district, right? Texas has seen an increase in inflation since 2021 of 14.6%. Now, what does it mean if you happen to be a taxpayer in Dallas ISD? Well, let me tell you, fuel costs, they're up 39%. Our general insurance just our general insurance that we keep on all of our facilities, 143%. That means we're paying almost 2.5 times this year what the cost was, but 2 years ago. Construction costs, 48% increase. And of course, health insurance that I'm sure everyone here has experienced as well. Those costs are up by 15%. So just to keep pace with inflation, I'm going to say that again, because this isn't asking for any more. This is just to keep up with inflation. We would really need to see an increase to that basic allotment of $6,160. We would need $900 per student. So that would take us to $7,060. That's what all public school associations are asking for. So what are they considering right now? Well, let me tell you that the House budget right now, remember, we're asking for $900 per student to the basic allotment, and that's just to keep pace with inflation. Right now, the House budget is proposing an increase of $90, 90, not 900, which was our request, but $90. Now they're also adding an additional $50, but that $50 is a one-time fund. So I don't count on that because that's like someone giving you money and saying, okay, increase salaries, but I'm only going to give you the money to do that one time. Why is that important? Because we know that when they give us dollars, the first place we want to look at is, can we improve the salaries of our teachers and our support staff, from custodians to counselors, nurses? Everyone needs an increase. But when you give us one-time funding, that's exactly what that means. Can I only give someone a raise one time? Well, then that's not really a raise. So right now, teacher pay raises are mandated in the budget, and they've made some suggestions about increasing this basic minimum pay for teachers, which would be great for everyone. Dallas pays above the teacher minimum, so it wouldn't affect us, but it would affect many of my colleagues in rural areas where they don't have a tax base to be able to pay salaries that would be upwards of $50,000. So they're paying way below the levels that Dallas ISD pays. And again, with one-time funding, it's virtually impossible for anyone to say they would be able to keep teachers and support staff in rural areas as well. So to put it another way, I'm sure you've heard that, there was an excess of the budget of around 30 to 33 billion, with a B. And all public schools in Texas would need to keep up with inflation about 15 billion. Currently, the legislature is looking at offering us an increase of about 5 billion, only a third of what we need. And at the same time, they're proposing property tax relief, which we would all enjoy, but that property tax relief is 17 billion. So we clearly see where their priorities are. Another item that's at the legislature, besides just school funding in general, is recapture. Many of you may have known that as Robin Hood. So recapture, probably one of the bills that's getting some attention is Senate Bill 2088 by Creighton, and that would provide a 10% prepayment discount. We do pay our recapture payments early. And just to give you an idea of what that means, people often confuse the fact that while a district like Dallas ISD has a great deal of property wealth, the students that we have very little personal wealth. We have a small percentage of our students that have some wealth, but over 80% of our students qualify for free or reduced meals. So the funding mechanisms have gotten confused between the students that we serve and the property wealth that is around us. That property wealth comes from, and we're happy for that property wealth, right? I mean, there are businesses and malls and expansions, and that's great, except those dollars now leave our system And they were intended to go back to schools. But the truth is that they go back into the governor's general fund. They actually don't get redistributed to schools. So just to let you know, just 2 years ago, Dallas ISD wasn't even paying into recapture. Right now, this past year, we paid $85 million of our tax money went back to the state. That is the 9th highest recapture payment in the state of Texas. This next year, I'm estimating our recapture payment to be $220 million. That's more than double what we're paying right now. And so this I use as a conversation to remind you all that vouchers make that worse. Because when vouchers take students out of a public school system, that means we have less student enrollment with still high property values, which means more money has to get returned back to the state. So let's lastly talk a little bit about vouchers, because I'm sure by now there's probably a lot of turning in people's brains and questions that may want to be asked. So there's several bills with regard to, and what they're calling ESAs. Please don't let the acronym or the name educational savings accounts fool you. If it looks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, and if it swims like a duck, it's usually a duck. So ESAs are in fact vouchers. Senate Bill 8 is proposing $8,000 to go from our public tax dollars to go to support vouchers. Well, public schools don't even get $8,000 per student. We get $6,160, as you may recall. So there are a lot of other portions of Senate Bill 8, and some of that includes that this is going to cost upwards of $1 billion a year to get vouchers started. And it doesn't include the fact that that would have an exacerbated cost, because every year there would be a new class of students then that would be eligible for vouchers, right? So you got to keep paying for the ones that you end up taking up. Plus each year there would be new students coming in terms of the way the bill has been presented. And this could mean that it could apply to some families who already have their children in schools. So in some ways, we want to remind everyone this really isn't as much about parent choice as it is about school choice, because all of the schools that are private have entrance requirements. So as a reminder, not just anyone would qualify. And if it didn't fulfill the entire tuition, parents would still have to come up with the rest of the money. So several of our schools are private schools, which we partner with and we have good collegial relationships with. This isn't an either or. There's room for private schools, as there are room for lots of private entities within the public forum, but none of them should take away from the public good. There is some slightly positive news in that the House adopted what's called the Herrero Amendment. And in that amendment, it's for the budget prohibiting vouchers, so that way no budget could be passed that would have vouchers in it. So that tells us a lot about where the House stands in future votes, but we know that the Senate is very much still working on trying to get a voucher or an ESA bill. There are unintended consequences that I'll close with. It is going to continue to make it harder for us to make salaries in public schools competitive, because it takes money out of the public school system. It would also take students out of our workforce pipeline, because there are no P-TECHs in any of the private schools. That doesn't exist. There are no career institutes where we can take students who may want for the workforce right away. And lastly, there's no accountability. These private schools would not be subject to the state curriculum. And I find it a little ironic that our governor quotes Our schools are for education, not indoctrination. And the very fact of it is that they would be going to schools where only the school determines what is being taught. Keep in mind that everything that we teach in public schools, those were approved by the Texas Education Agency, the commissioner who's appointed by the governor, and the State Board of Education. Those are not true statements for private schools, which is why they're private. Again, I don't think it's an either or, I think it's a both and, but I don't think vouchers are the way in which to support the improvements that are needed in public schools. And they also would not be held accountable for state assessments like STAR. Private entities have been able to maintain whatever types of systems they want. And lastly, they wouldn't even have to take students that would have any type of learning challenges or disabilities. Private schools get to make those decisions on their own because, again, they are in fact, or have been up to this point, private. I think there's also a lot of challenges for rural schools. They already have difficulty. And I think that that's an area that we're going to see our rural districts really, regardless of their political affiliation, they have stood very firm in not supporting ESAs or vouchers and dollars leaving the public school system. And I said, lastly, I probably want to talk very quickly about the last item, which I think is on everyone's mind, and that's just school safety. I want everyone to know how much the Board of Trustees and the community that is Dallas ISD seriously takes school safety. We can add up how much is invested in cameras, locks, fences, armed school resource officers, additional security guards, keyless entries, and I could go on. That adds up to $210 per student that we are currently paying for. And right now we get $9.72 per student. So the district is obviously investing way over and above those $9.72. And I'll close on the safety issue with the fact that TEA, the Texas Education Agency, has seen safety as such an important view or an important item to view that they've created a position called the Chief of School Safety. And they hired a very experienced and trained former Secret Service advisor who actually used to serve on the Vice President's protective detail. And so I find it ironic that we think it is so important that we're going to create a position and we're going to hire someone with this expertise, and yet we're spending $9.72 per student for safety in Texas schools. So I did a whole lot of talking, and so I'm sure that maybe Ashley, you or someone is going to have some questions to call out to me, and so I better stop.
So first
Thank you
question,
very much.
does the district have a plan for capturing college, career, and military readiness outcomes-based funding?
Yes, so we currently do actually have an accountability measure with regard to CCMR, college, career, military readiness, with the probably with the M that gets taken out and then put back in on multiple times, because some of the data are hard to collect on military, on students that are joining the military. Some of them are accessible to us and some of them have not been. So we do get outcomes-based funding. We are still leaving quite a bit of dollars on the table, to be completely transparent. And so we're going to continue to improve in that area. Part of that, though, does include industry partnerships for that career certification, and industry partners are a contributor to that, which again is something that's not available in private schools.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How does DISD share its point of view with elected officials, meetings, emails, etc.? Which representatives are most/least responsive?
So our delegation have actually been very responsive, but that's such a great question because we have a list of our delegation and their contact information and how they voted. And we encourage many of you to also send them communication about thanking them. Many of those that are in the House, for instance, that voted for the Herrero Amendment, we don't want them to just hear from us when we think we want to kind of get after them. We also want to thank them for some of the things that they're doing, right? And so it's important for people to reach out, and we can get that information to you all so that you will be able to provide that information to any of your members.
Yes, thank you. Next question, Dr. Elizalde, you mentioned student allotment increase just to keep up with inflation. What about the teacher allotment from TEA, known as TIA? Is there any plans to increase those?
Well, as a reminder, and I know this is this sounds very Dallas ISD oriented, not legislative. We do and have been actually paying towards because we have always had a pay for performance. I say always, since 2012, we've had a teacher pay for performance. And so we've been paying over and above, and the TIA is now a form of reimbursing the district for the dollars that have been spent towards salary increases. We'll continue to have conversations about how to improve that process. And in fact, I think our human capital management team has a group that is working with our teacher organizations.
Thank you. Next, does DISD have a dedicated lobbyist in Austin, or do you and the trustees go down and lobby?
It's a both and. So in many instances, yes, we do have, we have a lobbyist, and we also have memberships with organizations who have lobbyists, and we utilize them as well. So Dallas ISD, for instance, is a member of what's called TSA, the Texas School Alliance, and Texas School Alliance then has lobbyists on our behalf. We also have Texas Urban Council, which are the 10 large urban school districts in Texas. And we come together and we also have a lobbyist. And then our board of trustees, as well as myself or our staff, do go down to testify, to give our viewpoint, sometimes just in written form, sometimes in live testimony to some of the committees during the hearings.
Okay. And next, please explain more about property taxes from districts going into the general revenue.
So the original plan of recapture, also commonly known as Robin Hood, the idea was to even out the property values, because if you're in a Dallas ISD, you would have a lot more property wealth. And then in, let's say, Big Spring, Texas, or Roscoe, Texas, or those areas in east or west or even south of us, small rural do not have access to that type of business, right? And so their property values are much lower. No student should be worth less because of where they live, either throughout the state of Texas or the zip code in which they reside in, right? I think we may have disagree on other things, but I think we would all agree that students should be worth what they're worth, right? So with that, the idea was that the money then that was over above a certain amount, so everybody would be worth, and I'll make it simple, right? Like if we were to say every student is worth $1,000, and if your property taxes were raising $2,000 per student, then that extra $1,000 is supposed to go into a general, right? Like recover, so it's called recapture. And then whatever dollars were left there, they were to then go back out to make sure everybody had the $1,000. And then if there were money above that, then we would redistribute that money equally to everybody else so that everybody then might be getting $1,200. But the dollars would be coming from a variety of different districts because all of the districts have different property values. So the challenge with that is when the dollars come back together and then they're redistributed, when you have that much property wealth, the state then says, oh, we don't need to contribute that much more to education anymore. So we're going to keep those dollars because we've already given you the dollars that we think you're worth. And so the rest of it, all of us are writing checks to Dallas ISD or Highland Park or Garland or any of the surrounding areas or any school district that you reside in. And we might be thinking that all of those dollars are going to school. And that is not true. They go into a recapture, and very few of those dollars, if any, are ever redistributed to schools.
Okay, thank you. Next, TEA initiatives are set out to take effect if approved by June 2025, including increased funding for compensation for teachers, mentorship, certification changes, pipeline and grow your own training for support staff, and high school students to earn teacher certification. How can we lobby for those to take effect?
Well, I think some of those, the issue, and that was a lot. Some of them are actually set to go into effect immediately, because I think they said 2025. Some of them are to go into effect immediately. The challenge with that is it's not how do we get them to take effect? It's where's the money going to come from to make sure that all of them can take effect. So teacher salaries or staff salaries, again, from custodians to counselors. The challenge is there is not a single educator that I know that doesn't think all of those people deserve raises. Like that's a absolutely with an exclamation point. The challenge is where are the dollars going to come from? And in fact, vouchers again do the exact opposite. They take money out of the system. So the chances of us being able to pay our teacher assistants, our librarians, our nurses, our counselors, our specialists, our reading interventionists, our teachers, our assistant principals, bus drivers, all of those are affected every time we have a loss of enrollment, regardless of the reason for the loss of enrollment.
And what are your thoughts about the school safety bill passed by the House yesterday? It is my understanding it increases funding for safety, but requires armed personnel on all campuses.
Well, and so that one is, you know, it's one of those where I'm going to go pull up my notes on that one. So the addition of saying we're going to have, again, there are two issues with regard to having, we do have armed personnel at all of our secondary schools and some of our multi-level schools, meaning like the K-8s, some of them do, not every single one. So number one, where does the money come from for us to pay for more hired individuals that have that peace officer, licensed peace officer certification? And mind you, and that also have training with regard to how to do school security, because that's very different from your regular police officer. It's very different work. It's about relationships with students. It's about relationships within your community as much as it is about ensuring that we make nothing dangerous outside come inside our building, as well as things happening on the campus. Secondly, there's already a shortage of law enforcement officers. So what starts to sound like a great idea, you have to ask yourself, where's the staffing going to come from? And then where are the dollars going to come from? And that's why I think there's a lot of hesitation. Like, okay, we already asked teachers to do so much more. Now, are you really going to ask me to ask them to go get certified on how to carry a gun? And is that really what I signed up for when I said I wanted to be a teacher? And so I think it's a very slippery slope. And I think we have to go back to asking ourselves, what problem are we trying to solve? And is this really the best solution to that challenge?
Okay. So next, what bills do you want and need citizen support to help all students?
Thank you so much for asking that question. Our budget, we absolutely need folks to help us just get across that we need them to fully fund public education. That 6160 again, to me, the question of, so we think $8,000 is a good amount, right? To give to to ESAs, but yet we're doing 6,160 per student in public school setting. And I would say the other part is the school safety that was just raised, that other excellent question that you just asked me. Because remember, I said we're investing around $210 per student and we're getting $9.72. So the more we can ask people at the legislature to think about, we really need $200 per student. And that hasn't even I haven't even started to talk about proactive measures like intervening earlier on in mental health and clinicians and counseling, which is the other end of the spectrum, right? Because it's a both and. It's how do we get to a point where we don't have individuals with these types of behaviors? And we do think public schools can help, but we also don't think public schools are the end all for these types of situations. So I would say on the overall budget, and not giving 5 billion, but rather 15 billion, giving us a basic allotment and supporting school safety bills that talk about $200 and more.
Okay. Has DISD taken a stand on banning books in school libraries?
So we have a process in place and we utilize the process to evaluate books that are brought to our attention by either by school personnel or by parents. And it goes through a process. And if the process determines that that's not an appropriate book for a particular place, then we absolutely take it out of circulation. But we are not in the habit, nor shall we become, the library police. We think we need to do a really good job of communicating with parents, and parents can help us. Anytime a parent has a concern, the more they talk to us about those concerns, the better we are able to respond to those needs. So many times our parents know some things and they absolutely have been wonderful about communicating any concerns, and we utilize the process. Again, it's very easy to take a zero tolerance stand, or we're going to take all of these out. And I think, we have to ask ourselves, it's like what Susie Bell started with, it's the democratic process, and we need to utilize those processes, because it's always easy when we disagree with something, but we have to ask ourselves, but what if it's a thought that's different from mine? Does that mean it shouldn't exist? I think that's the very founding nature of the United States of America, it's those freedoms that we have. And can we do a good job of making sure we have appropriately aged books for our students? I think absolutely. And I think by and far our librarians, we have great librarians, and they do a great job of helping us ensure we have great appropriate, age appropriate materials for all students.
Okay, thank you. Next, what is the state legislature doing to fund and add additional services for special needs students? How do those proposals help or hurt students with special needs?
Yeah, another just great, very insightful group here with these questions y'all are asking. They're really, special education, as I think probably the person who asked the question knows, the state of Texas has already been put on notice by the federal government because of these unwritten quotas, which did exist. We would get in trouble. We would get corrective action notices if we were identifying too many students who needed special services or special needs. And yet at the same time, none of us are the same. Our districts are very different. So saying that you could only have a certain percentage of students identified with special needs was completely unrealistic. The other issue with that is, what does the funding? Those students are regular ed students, and then there's special ed students on top of that. And if they also receive bilingual or ESL services, that's an additional service. It's not an either or, it's a both and more, because those are students that should be able to be in a mainstream environment as much as possible. And they should also be able to get the specialized services that they need, either through special education or bilingual or ESL. So the dollars, once again, teachers and support staff are being asked always to do more, and they're being asked to do it with less. And so there really hasn't been a bill that has come forward really identifying the fact that special education needs appropriate funding and that we also need appropriate staffing. Educational diagnosticians, which help us in identifying students with special needs, are very hard to come by. And most of the time it's because they work in private companies because they're not going to get paid. It's a market comparison kind of decision for them. And so again, I think it's a real need on the part of our legislatures to speak with people in the field. You know, I started with that quote from Ann Richards, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And we're not at the table. They're not, and it doesn't have to be me, but they certainly need to be visiting with real school practitioners, teachers, counselors, special ed teachers, TAs, parents, and truly getting their voices heard.
Thank you. Next, if the vouchers bill does pass, how will you balance the budget? Make cuts or raise taxes? Please be specific.
I don't see raising taxes as a realistic option. I'm never going to be able to tell you never because I never know what the actual circumstances are. What I can tell you is raising taxes would be a last resort. And by the way, Dallas ISD has the lowest tax rate allowable by law. I couldn't even go any lower if we wanted to. But we also know that it can sound like we have a very low tax rate, but if your property values are high, the tax rate really, I mean, it matters because it's a percentage of what you actually have. However, the real issue is how much am I paying, right? And so I think the other thing with regard to that is all other districts will have to be making these decisions, not just Dallas ISD. And in the end, we have to look at the fact that 80 to 85% of any school district's budget is in people. So if vouchers or ESAs pass, what does that look like? All districts, all of us are talking about it. And it can look like, I can be specific, I just can't tell you which option we would go, because I would want to hear from our community about where they would want us to go, as I know other districts would too. It could mean, obviously, if you have less students, you're going to need less staff. But does that mean that some schools become so small that we might have to consolidate, or that some services would not be provided? Would we have to finally be one of the last school districts that no longer could offer music and art at every single school? Those are the things that Dallas ISD has resisted and has been proactive in making sure we didn't do that to students, as many other school districts did. But if vouchers passed, those are some of the hard decisions we would be grappling with.
Thank you. Next, what happens to the state tax money allocated for public education in independent school districts? Please explain what independent means in independent school districts.
So by and far, we either have an independent school district in Texas, or you have a consolidated school district in Texas. There is one municipality school district in Texas, meaning it's run by, I think, the mayor. I think it's Stafford Municipal School District. All other school districts are either ISDs or CSDs. And the and even the consolidated, it just meant those were two independent or more independent school districts that came together and consolidated. The I in independent school district was intended to remind everyone that each school district would have a locally elected school board of trustees that would be, again, it's back to the democratic process. It's having locally elected individuals to reflect the values of that community. So it's also a reminder, though, that the only reason an ISD exists is because the state of Texas said public education is so important that we can't try to manage that for the entire state. We need to create independent school districts with locally elected officials to help in the leading and the management of those school districts, while at the same time understanding that the dollars of that school district are not and were never intended just for that school district. They were intended for the whole state. We're just a pass through. So an ISD exists to be a pass-through for the collection of the tax dollars, but not a pass-through with regard to local community values and thoughts and how those are reflected in trustees.
Thank you. Let's see. Next, has the TEA recommended additional counselors, mental health professionals, school nurses in Texas public schools? Is there a study documenting a truly effective ratio of these professionals in public schools to meet students' needs to ensure, especially when the mental health needs are so great?
Yeah, they have not done a recommendation other than really they keep referencing the national average, which is not a recommendation. And so typically a school is about 450 students to one counselor. Now in Dallas ISD, we're averaging 318 students to one counselor. That does not include that this board of trustees and my predecessor brought forward an investment of $11 million to add what are called college access providers. And this is to take some of the academic guidance and advising that counselors have to do at secondary schools, at high schools, and put that on individuals who have that area of expertise. So we know we need to continue to lower as much as possible that student to teacher ratio. What I can tell you is Dallas ISD has the largest number of mental health clinicians of any other public school district in the state. And again, that's just done by prioritizing that over other things. And do we still have enough? No, we don't. We also have to ask ourselves how many things that are societal concerns are we going to continue to ask schools to do without providing the personnel and or the funding to do so?
Okay. And last question, has a bill been filed for ISDs to teach about democracy and all systems of government? What does DISD need to increase access to civics for all students?
So I do know that, and I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head, the grade level, but we absolutely do have in the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, there's a complete unit on democracy and civic engagement. And I do believe there's a vertical alignment, and I'll be happy to even share that out with you all, because I think these are the types of opportunities that we also want to partner with groups like the League of Women Voters to have as guest speakers with some of our students, so that they can hear directly from different types of organizations, just in terms of how the group comes together, what the mission and vision of your all's group is, and how those groups work. So I'll be happy to provide that as well. I'm taking my notes here, along with our delegation list, so that we would be able to even more meaningfully engage with the League of Women Voters, as well as many other civic organizations.
Great. We would appreciate that. And thank you so much. All right, folks, thank you so much for attending. And thank you so much, Dr. Elizalde, for your time and for sharing this important information about the legislature.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, Susie Bell.
Bye. And thank you everyone for attending this evening. As mentioned earlier, we will send out a recording of this to all participants and all registrants so they can send this out and share, and make sure that you also advocate for the issues that you care about this legislative session.
I would also like to say that we invite anyone that wants to participate in our education committee, and you may call me. You get your records, you can get the number on the through the league office, but I'd be glad to tell you it's 214-732-8610. Thank you so much for your interest in public education and attending our meeting. We'll have more, and go to the website and see our last program on critical race theory. Thank you.